Welcome to In the Garden. Good morning. I am Mary Barnhart, your moderator and a Montgomery County Master Gardener. And our experts today are Kathy Jentz of the Washington Gardener magazine and the Washington Gardener DC podcast, as well as a co-author of the Urban Garden. Steve Dubick, the Montgomery County Master Gardener Coordinator for UMD Extension. Some of the services Master Gardeners provide include our speakers group, demonstration gardens, youth gardening programs, therapeutic horticulture, special events, and ask a Master Gardener to name a few. Kathy Jentz is editor and publisher of the award-winning Washington Gardener magazine, based in Washington, D.C. She is a host of the popular GardenDC podcast, and she is co-author of the Urban Garden, 101 Ways to Grow Food and Beauty in the City. Her mission is to turn black thumbs green. A lifelong gardener, Kathy believes that growing plants should be stress-free and enjoyable. Her philosophy is inspiration over perspiration. Kathy, what's your favorite gardening activity?
That's a good question. I would say just enjoying cutting the flowers and bringing them inside to have by my desk while I'm not able to be out in the garden is one of my favorite things to do, is to make little, bud vase arrangements to have at my sinks, next to my bedside, and on my desk.
Okay, thank you. Today, our presenter, Kathy Jentz, will talk to us about the Washington Garden magazine and also the Washington Garden DC podcast. Kathy?
Thanks, Mary. I'm going to share my screen now and hopefully pull up the PowerPoint. Everybody see that? Great. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for hosting Mary and co-hosting with me, Stephen. We're going to get into some Q&A in a little bit, but first I was going to tell you a little bit about myself and how the magazine got started and all of that. So as Mary shared, my mission is to turn black thumbs green. I believe that growing plants should be stress-free and enjoyable. My philosophy is inspiration over perspiration, and that I want you to think and be smart about your gardening, because so many of us are so busy these days, or we have limited resources or limited energy. So even if you're just gardening in a couple pots, that's still gardening to me, right? So let's dive into a little bit about me and my background. So this is a picture of myself. I think I'm about 7 or 8 years old here in my grandparents' apple orchard in Northwest Indiana. So my dad's side of the family were farmers in Indiana. My mom's side of the family in Germany, where I was born in Bavaria, they had an allotment garden, which is similar to our community gardens here. And that's where they spent most of their weekends, was in that allotment garden. So I have a real soft spot in my heart for community gardens. And I still have a community garden plot myself in downtown Silver Spring. That's where I grow my edibles and my herbs and a lot of my cut flowers. And in my home garden right across the street, I grow shrubs, trees, natives, exotics, anything that I can experiment with. My garden is a jungle. Don't come to my garden expecting perfection in any way, shape, or form. I'm kind of the person who gets a lot of sample plants and just kind of stuffs them in wherever I can. And I'm trialing these plants for our region, for our growing area. So we'll know, can I recommend them in a talk? Can I recommend them in the magazine or in the podcast? Are they going to do well in your home gardens? And I'm a big believer also in laissez-faire gardening, which means survival of the fittest. I kind of throw you down, stick you in a hole, and if you survive on your own, great. If you don't, maybe not such a great garden plant. So I treat my plants not really babying them, but giving them some tough love. And so those tough love plants are the ones that I usually end up recommending to my readers. So I'm going to jump into how I started the magazine. So my background is journalism, and I went to the University of Maryland journalism program, and I graduated and did a lot of work for local area associations and nonprofits. So I was doing their publications, their websites and newsletters and things. And then it got to a point in my career where I kind of hit a ceiling of either I was going to go on to an executive level oversight and not be doing publications at all, or just be doing the same thing over and over again. And I wanted to work for myself. And at the same time, I had a crazy gardening bug. I was like gardening every single little space I could get a hold of, and at the same time looking desperately for local gardening information. So great resources from our local extension and master gardeners, but not so great from the general media. Like we have, garden column in the Washington Post and a couple gardening books that cover the Mid-Atlantic area, but not too much back then. So I launched it. Our first issue was March 2005, and immediately people were coming up to me who were either transplants from other parts of the country to our part of the country, or they had been gardening for years but hadn't had a local good source of information for gardening. So they were super happy with the publication. And we cover everything that grows here. So if it's edible, ornamental, if it's native, if it's exotic, if it grows here, that's what we talk about. So these are just a few of the back issue covers on display here. And I wanted to talk really briefly about what happened during our COVID period for the last 18 months. So a lot of us kind of shut down, right? But I found, and I had a little bio of myself in a local blog that the picture is coming from here, that there were so many new gardeners that my personal outreach wasn't even enough. Like I was pumping out garden tips, answering questions, getting hundreds of emails a day, but just so many new gardeners coming into our world. So we have our annual seed exchange that we were still able to host even during COVID by doing a socially distanced event. And I launched our podcast, GardenDC. So that first week of quarantine in March of 2020 was our first episode of GardenDC, and we've been going weekly ever since. So we're on episode 75. That tells you how long it's been. We had a little short break for the holidays, but 75 weeks of shows tells you how long we've been in this COVID period. And on the GardenDC weekly podcast, we interview local plant experts. So an episode could be just focused on pawpaws or just focused on viburnum, or it could be a more general topic like how to weed your garden. And that's free and available to anybody in the world. You can listen to it on your computer, on your smartphone, on any device that you have. So that's available to anybody to get great local gardening information. And then, as Mary mentioned, I'm co-writing a book, The Urban Garden, that's coming out next March. And that's specifically on small space gardening and maximizing those small space gardens. So whether you're in urban or suburban, or even out in the country, if you're small space gardening, you'll probably be interested in that book. And that's available for pre-order now on Amazon, but not coming out till next March. And then I just wanted to give a really quick shout out that a lot of my talks, of course, in the last year and a half have moved online just like this. And I actually love it. It makes the audience bigger. Not as many people can come in person as can see you on the internet. So I'm having a great time with Zoom and sharing information online. And some talks have been hybrids. So some local garden clubs were meeting outside on a plaza and still having it put over the internet at the same time. So that's been fun to try out. Still attending as many open gardens, again, masked and with social distancing as I can, and still holding plant swaps. So this was a plant swap that we held with perfect social distancing because we marked on the ground where everybody should stand. So we're still able to get around and do a lot of stuff. I'm still able to get out, garden, and weed, and that's at a local shared garden for the Tacoma Hort Club that we're taking care of there. And welcome you all to join me out in the garden and for some great weed warrior maintenance of our local parks as well. So this is quickly my contact information. So my blog and website is washingtongardener.blogspot.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at WDC Gardener. and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And I'm Kathy with a K, Jentz. Thank you all. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen now so we can get over to those questions that I know are waiting.
Thank you, Kathy. Please contact us if you have any gardening questions or questions regarding any of the programs we have mentioned above and have on our website, which should be posted shortly. Please remember to include your email address, email in case we need to follow up. You can also view previously answered questions from In the Garden on the YouTube announcements, if any. Since the last program, we've received the following questions. The first question deals with invasive grass. An area that was recently converted from grass to landscape beds is having a lot of grass grow back. I'm undecided about how to handle it. I planted spreading plants like Pachyra, Carex, Phlox divertica, Stolonifera, ostrich, and cinnamon ferns, along with some other shady, moist, soil-loving plants. If I put down newspaper and mulch, it will stop the grass, but slows the spreading plants from taking over the space. Hand weeding is a never-ending task. To complicate matters, when we get a heavy rain, water flows from over the area and disturbs the soil, leading to the more weeds, washing away mulch and causing mulch to pile up around the base of the plants. The area is always moist. What do you suggest? Kathy, can you address this question?
Sure. Thanks, Mary. So this person had shared some of the weeds that are popping up, and in the photo, there was Japanese stiltgrass and redbud seedlings. So let me address the redbud seedlings really quickly first, and then talk about the stiltgrass. So the redbud seedlings, that reseeds from those little pea pods that hang off the branches. So after the flowering of the red bud and those seed buds starting to form, you can just go along and kind of snip them off or pinch them off, and don't compost them. Just send them out with your landscape waste, because then you'll have like hundreds of little red bud seedlings in your compost. So that will cut down on a lot of the red bud seeding all over the place, unless you want tons of red bud in your mulch and stuff. So as far as the Japanese stiltgrass, there is a pre-emergent that you can use in a mulched area. You can't use it in your lawn, according to Montgomery County pesticide regulations. It can only be used in landscape bedding. So she has created a bed there so she can use the pre-emergent, and that can only be applied in springtime. So about April-ish timing, but read the directions on the pre-emergent, follow all those instructions for the rate for usage. But that's the only thing that knocks back Japanese stiltgrass. Even if you were to spray it with an herbicide later on in the season, it would still just come right back on you. And of course, hand pulling wherever you see it. And she talked a little bit about how the mulch was coming down the slope and, pouring down because of the rains and stormwater. So I would say the more plants that you can plant in that area, it was planted pretty sparsely, but the more you can get filled in, the more it will hold down that slope and stop that erosion of the mulch coming down.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Our next question is about a dogwood tree, and it is what's going on with my neighbor's dogwood tree. Steve, you want to handle this?
Sure. Thanks, Mary. Yeah. It's a little difficult to tell exactly what's going on with the tree, but it is a large, mature dogwood tree, and it looks like it may have been undergone stress from possible things like dogwood borer or maybe a canker. And going under severe stress like that will often weaken the plant tissue, the cell tissue in the leaves, and make it more vulnerable or susceptible to leaf spot diseases. And there's a whole host of leaf spot diseases that get onto the dogwood. So that might be part of what's going on here. One of the issues that dogwoods were getting earlier in the year was powdery mildew. And that you can see it present earlier in the year, but as it gets hotter and drier period, a lot of that fungal mycelium is gone. So you're left with sort of the damage that's kind of there. So it may be a collection of fungal like leaf spot issues. And it's I think it's been brought on because the plant material has gotten weakened. So You may want to examine the trunk of the tree, see if you can see any exit holes possibly from borers. Look around the base of the tree, possibly for a canker. What can you do? You can prune out the dead and dying wood. If it is borers, treat for them. And then probably just try to give the plant a little bit of love. Make sure it doesn't go under additional stress in the future. This time of the year, in the middle of September, there's probably not a lot we can do other than rake up the leaves, which may have fungal spores on it, and then, compost those. And so hopefully next year will be a better year.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure, Mr.
The next question is about a white swamp oak. What ate the top half of my neighbor's white swamp oak? The bottom half is healthy, and there's some cicada damage, but the top half is defoliated. And that, Steve, can you answer
Yeah, Mary. Sure, Mary. So if you kind of look up the top of at the picture, then you look at the canopy, it looks fairly sparse. And you can see a little bit of the remnants of the leaves, the midribs. It was probably some feeding on late season caterpillars. And there's a number of them get onto oaks. In some ways, this is kind of a good thing. It's part of the ecosystem, and the birds eat the caterpillars and so forth. But certain groups of caterpillars, and I think it might be the orange-striped oakhorn, get in really, really large numbers. They're very gregarious. And they do a lot of chewing damage to the oaks. The good news is it's really late in the season, so the damage they do to the tree isn't really going to be something that's really going to stress and weaken the tree out. It's much more of a cosmetic, aesthetic injury. And their populations vary from year to year. So you might have them this year in that swamp white oak, and then maybe 50 feet down the, another part of the yard, they're over there. So it's really too late. They're gone. They've done their thing. Unless you still see them, they still can be active this late in the year, but it is getting late. Sometimes they're black with a little bit of orange, and sometimes they're more orange with a little bit of black. There's a couple different versions, but probably what's happened, the damage is done. It's not going to be something that's life-threatening to the tree. It's just something we just have to kind of tolerate, and that's what happens. So no big worries.
Okay, thank you. Question 4 deals with English holly dieback, and it is, why are my holly branches slowly turning brown? How do I stop the spread of the insect or disease, and can I apply pesticides?
Okay, looking at the photo. So, Mary, I think it's a Japanese holly, not an English holly, correct? Looking at the photo.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it resembles almost a boxwood. A lot of people get them confused with boxwood, too. So, looking at the photo, the damage is limited just to a couple branches, and it's not all over the shrub. So, I don't think it's a disease issue. It might be some damage just to those short branches. And I would just prune out just the damaged branch all the way back to the growth stem. So not just the tip, but go all the way back in there, reach in there, prune those out, and get rid of those with your landscape waste in case there is some insect or disease issue. You don't want to introduce that to your compost pile. But otherwise, looks like a pretty healthy plant, just those kind of minor bits, and no need for spraying.
Okay. Thank you. The next question deals with black growth on plum cherry. And the question is what is the black growth on my cherry plum branches? How can I control it? Steve?
Yeah, this what you have is a black knot, and it's a fungus that gets onto a number of species of prunus. Plum, it really likes plum. So our flowering plum, or if you have edible plums, it likes those trees a lot, but also likes our native black cherry. So the issue sometimes with that is if you're growing, flowering plum, and nearby in the woods around as black cherry, that you're very likely to get black knot. It would almost be expected. So it's probably not too much you can do about the ones in the woods and things like that, but just something that's sometimes where it's coming from. So if you are present nearby where there's a lot of black cherry, expect to get black knot, or maybe want to avoid planting plum. But basically, pruning out the cankers. These are perennial cankers. They come back year after year and they get bigger and bigger. So pruning them out when they're smaller is the way to go. But sometimes you really don't get a handle on it until they've gotten fairly big. And by then you might have to remove fairly large branches. There was at one time, at least, there was a fungicide label for it, but it's really, really tricky. And the results from your time and your effort is really not always reliable. So probably the thing to do is really just to prune out the sections of the affected plants as soon as you see that, increase the amount of air circulation, and they're trying to help to mitigate it, minimize it. Sometimes you can, you can go with this, you can, tolerate this for a period of time, but for the most part, it's really pruning, and really fungicides really don't work in this, are not really effective in this situation.
Thank you. My Forsythia hedge has these growths on the branches. What are they? Are they harmful? How do I get rid of them? Steve, how about this question?
Okay. So this is a gall that gets on the Forsythia, and the Forsythia is I certainly have to give it its due. I know it's kind of a one-season wonder, and some people are kind of down on it, but it is a very tough and rugged plant. Saying that, it does get maybe a couple issues, not very many. This is one, and it's not a huge one. It's a gall. Now, in the past, we thought this gall was caused by fungus, but since then we've learned it's actually caused by bacteria. The end result is the same. It's similar to black knot too. So when you see these galls, you want to prune them out. The good thing about a Forsythia is that it generally will outgrow these galls. If it is really quite a few galls in a situation, then maybe the thing to do is to prune the plant back really hard to the ground. Take those shoots where the galls and just remove them from that site, either the whole way, or if you can't compost it, don't leave them around near the Forsythia. The new growth will come out, and as the new growth, if you see any galls, start to manage those so it doesn't get as bad as it was before. But normally, it's not a life-threatening thing. It's more of a nuisance, these galls. So it was called Phomopsis. It's actually more likely to be caused by a bacteria in the genus Pseudomonas. So there's really no chemical applications in here that really I think would be effective. Again, it's really pruning out affected areas. But the thing you have going for you got a tough plant, and it's going to come back. So if you prune it hard, you shouldn't have any worries.
Okay, thank you. What is the insect infestation in our bushes in Kensington? Attached are some pictures of our bushes with webbing, which we hope give enough detail to help identify what the pests might be. We've been applying neem oil and recently Captain Jack's, but the mites keep coming back or never leave. Recently, they attacked our dwarf, Japanese maple, and azaleas as well. Many thanks for your help in identifying this pest, and also for helping us to figure out how to treat it. Kathy?
Yeah, so the picture and in the question, they gave a big clue when they said webbing. So literally, it's spider webbing. And no need to spray anything. The spiders are cleaning up a lot of those bad guys in the garden for you. So they're catching some of those little aphids and mites and things. And so this is the time of year, late summer and early fall, where you start to see like little sprays of webs along shrubs. And it can look kind of alarming, especially early in the morning. All of a sudden, these all popped up overnight, it seems like, and they have dew on them, so they're glistening and they're more noticeable. Other times of year, they're more hidden or less noticeable, but the spiders are definitely more active this time of year. So they're our garden friends. So again, no need to spray. If you don't like the look of the webbing, you could take a small stick or something, wrap the webbing up and try to move the spider to somewhere else. But I'd say welcome it. It's free Halloween decorations. Come on now. You don't have to buy that fake cotton webbing and put it on all your shrubs. Just leave that there for the fall. And you could say they moved in. And in other societies, spiders are considered good luck. That if you have a spider in your household or a spider that's taken up residence, because they are protectors and they're seen as that web is like a mother web that protects you. And just a side note that you're also going to see some larger webs now from the orb spiders, the orb weavers, and they're even more dramatic than what she's showing in the pictures with some of the smaller webs that are on shrubs. And those are usually that'll be like 2 or 3 feet wide and really beautiful webs. And then you'll have this big dramatic spider in the middle that has like a yellow torso or almost a chartreuse green. So look out for those. Those are fabulous helpers in the garden to take care of some of those garden pests.
Okay. Steve, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, that I think Kathy's right on it. So you leave those spiders there. They're your friends. They're going to help you out. They really help to mitigate a lot of our potential pest problems, mosquitoes, and all kinds of things. So yeah.
Okay. The next question is milkweed, and it's a fairly long question. It goes, last year we planted milkweed in 3 separate areas around the house and in the backyard, and counted about 75 caterpillars throughout the season. This year, the milkweed came back as perennials, and we had the following problems. The milkweeds planted last year grew back early in the spring and was developing seed pods by late spring. Should we have cut off the seed pods or let them follow nature's course? Second question, although we had many caterpillars that became monarchs last year, this year we had none. We see that the monarchs landing on the milkweed in the spring, but nothing seems to have resulted from that. Not one caterpillar. In your opinion, was this possibly due to the excessive rain, the early flowering of the plants, something else we should have considered? Since we had no milkweed to eat, no caterpillars to eat the milkweed, last year at this time they had consumed every piece of milkweed available. The milkweed is withered and brown. Of course, the monarch caterpillar season is over, so they won't be around to eat what is still green. Usually, we would wait until fall or late spring to cut them down. Would there be a problem if we cut them down now, or should we leave them until spring? Steve, I know you've had some experience with monarchs. Yeah. Can you answer this one? Maybe.
Well, I'll try to answer. I think Kathy will help me out with this one. Mm-hmm. So this is a lot going on here. So one of the things we've learned, and I think we have a website up there from, I think it's from a gentleman named Tony Gomez. It lists a lot of the potential problems these caterpillars get. They're just like us. They get sick, and there's a number of things that will cause their sickness. And so I've raised them, and sometimes I've seen them in the wild, and sometimes you'll see them, they'll get into a chrysalis, but they'll never come out of the chrysalis. They just essentially darkens up. And so there's a number of diseases. Some of them really go by some really interesting names like Black Death and other things like that. So if you do ever try to raise them, there's pros and cons with that. It's something you need to think about. If you have a cage or you have them around, you want to make sure that you disinfect it, that you clean it. You're probably using something, if a plastic container where you can wipe it down and disinfect it in a little tent or something like that. Use it if you decide to raise them. Sometimes people will do is they'll find a milkweed plant, they'll put an egg, and they'll have it on a swamp milkweed, and they'll put it in a pod, and they'll put it in an area as an educational thing for the kids, just to see this and study this, and that's kind of neat. I think there's a lot to learn from this. But yeah, there's a number of diseases out there that are, get in there. But as far as milkweed's kind of strange. Sometimes you'll see put all its flush of growth out in the first part of the year, and it kind of peters out, and sometimes you get a little later on. There's still some monarchs out there. We have 1 or 2 up the school, some late ones. It's amazing. You start to worry about them. You say, hey, you better get on the move. But right now we have 1 or 2 up there in their final stages. They'll probably get into a chrysalis here fairly soon, but they're probably the last, around. So I know probably Kathy has something to add with this, and she's probably.
Yeah, and I'd say, so the website that Steve was referring to is monarchbutterflygarden.net. So NET, which I think is funny because it goes with butterflies, right? Net. So she specifically was asking the early blooming and turning to pods quickly, should she have cut those back? And yes, I have found you can cut back your milkweed in late May, early June and get a second flush of. So if they were already forming the pods, just inspect the plants, of course, make sure there's no eggs under the leaves and there's no caterpillars forming on them. But, just by accident, we've cut back some milkweeds when you mow or you weed whack, and then they'll spring back up and have a later flush. But then she's also asking about they're turning brown now, and they're already spent, so they wouldn't be any kind of either flowering on them anymore or a food source if there were any caterpillars around. So it sounds like she can go ahead and cut those back, especially if they're starting to look really ragged. And unless she wants to save those pods for the seeds for next year to scatter them around, then I think those could be safely cut back at this time of year, once they've turned to the brown and almost gray phase of the milkweed.
Okay, thank you. The next question deals with Coleus, and I have many different Coleus plants in my garden this summer. One of them has never send up any flowers as the rest had. Are there varieties that don't usually flower? Kathy, I know you've had done some work with Coleus. You want to?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Coleus. I think they're such wonderful, reliable annual plants for color in the garden. And I actually let most of mine flower, the old-fashioned ones, because I like the look of the flowers. And then I might pinch them back a little bit to get the plants to be more full. But a lot of the new plant breeding in Coleus is to be flowerless or to have a tiny minor flower towards the very end of the season. So don't be surprised. If you're looking for flowering Coleus, then I would get some more of the old-fashioned, older varieties that you can grow from seed. But most of the stuff that you're going to find in the garden center now is either little flowering or no flowering. And some of them also are self-shedding so that the flowers will shed and then they'll just keep branching out, because you want those full, big, nice Coleus, because really you're having it for the foliage and not for the flowers is most people's intention in the garden. And one of those new series is called Main Street series. So those will have like street names in them. And a lot of those have really dark, big foliage and almost a shrubby size and habit of growing. So those I've found to not flower at all. And of course, we all know that we can propagate Coleus pretty easily. So you can take a branch now, snip it off, take off the lower leaves, put that in water for a week or so until it sends out some roots, and then pot that up and winter that over as a houseplant even. So even though Coleus is considered annual, it's pretty easy to winter over as a houseplant and get some cuttings going. Before the first frost is when I would grab them. So if there's a few favorite Coleus that you grew this year and you want to have them for next year, good time of year to start looking around and seeing which ones you want to take some cuttings from.
Okay, very interesting. The last question we have deals with buttonbush. The leaves and buttons on my newly planted buttonbush are turning brown and falling off. What is causing this, and is there something I can do to help the shrub? I planted a buttonbush in a moist area at the bottom of the slope in my garden about 2 weeks ago. It did well at first, but in the last few days, the leaves are becoming brown and falling off. The flower seed heads are doing the same thing. I planted the buttonbush where we had to remove a spruce that was dying of needle cast disease earlier this summer. Does this look like something I can stop? Okay, Steve, you want to finish with this question?
Sure, Mary. Yeah, so as you stated in there, something that was recently planted. Judging from the pictures, it just appears that the plant is undergoing a fair amount of transplant shock, but buttonbush is a fairly tough plant. I think the plant's just trying to, sort of balance itself out after it's being transplanted, the roots being disturbed and injured. So it's like chucking some of the older inner leaves, trying to kind of sort of like readjust to all this injury that had occurred. So it may look pretty rough right now, but I think next year it'll be fine. And probably what you're going to have is the plant balance out to adjust to its new site with the light and the moisture, where it was grown in a nursery situation, where it was maybe it's from farther south, or maybe it's under a higher fertilization regime. The plant's trying to adjust to its new site. So this is sort of normal to be expected, but it does look a little bit dramatic in this picture. But I think for next year everything will be fine. It's gonna be okay.
Okay, thank you, Steve and Kathy. That was the last of our questions. If I have a few announcements, if you want to submit a question, to go to our link, it should be up on the screen. It's https://go.umd.edu/in-the-garden /. Please enter as much detail as possible. Photos are welcome and important. Cutoff for the next session of In the Garden is Wednesday, September 25th at 6 p.m. to be answered on Tuesday, October 5th at 12 noon. Please include your email in case we need to follow up. We will make every effort to answer your questions on air, but if we run out of time on our show, we'll provide you the questions by email, or the answers by email. Did we get any questions online, Bev?
No, nothing online this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kathy and Steve, for being our experts today. And our researchers for this week were Ken, Susan, Deborah, Ray, Heidi, Melissa, and Mary. And thank you all for joining us. Our last In the Garden session for this year will be October 5th. Our speaker will be Jeanette Proudfoot of the Montgomery County Parks Brookside Children's Garden. Remember, if you have any questions that you would like answered, please contact us at the link on the screen that should be up and by September 25th at 6 p.m. See you again soon.